this conversation originated from formal one-on-one meetings that Dean Hill Clark hosts with all of our first and second year faculty. And during those conversations, she gleans a lot of information from them in terms of things that they may be in need of, things that they may be interested in, and things that we would always take into consideration. One of those points that was generated from those conversations involved thoughts and ideas from some of the first and second year faculty around their interest in additional information, ideas around effective instructional strategies. To learn from their colleagues, from each other, especially during this season of all the adjustments and transitions that faculty have had to make this semester and planning to make next semester, and who knows what may happen after that. It was just a point saying, you know what if we can just have a conversation where we would invite some of our faculty members, our new non-tenured faculty, and a few others to just come together to share their thoughts and ideas. And so from that, the concept for the inaugural Institute on Equity-Driven Teaching was born. And from that, it speaks again to the heart of our mission and the vision that we have for this college, and to have this conversation to be one of many that we would engage in throughout the year. And so the first topic for this Institute, again, was driven by the conversations with our new and non-tenured faculty, which is entitled Lessons Learned, Student Engagement During Unprecedented Times. And so it is not for them to come in and we don't expect to have all the answers. I think what we really are looking toward is just hearing from multiple perspectives of how needs have changed, how preparations have changed, how assessment has changed, and as well as all of our efforts to meet the needs of our students, which have definitely changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and so many of the other factors that have affected teaching and learning throughout our college work this semester. So I would like to introduce our panel for today, who will be preparing their formal remarks. And again, as you have ideas, questions, or points, we encourage you to post those in the chat room. Our coordinator, our manager for marketing and communications, Lauren Walker, will be monitoring the chat room. And as we get closer to the end of our hour today, she will share those with us, and we will offer then other perspectives on any of the points and comments that you have that you need to ask. And so with that, I would like to, again, first just introduce our panel and to ask if they have any opening remark or just would like to share which department, because we have so many new and non-tenured faculty with us that may not have a chance to meet everyone. We did not have our formal greetings as we would have done in person this year because of the pandemic. If you would please introduce yourself, the department in which you're in, and maybe how many, if there's an area of specialty in which you're placed, and how many years you've been with the college. It would be just helpful to provide some context. And so I'll begin with Dr. Edith Gnanadass.
Good afternoon, everybody, and happy post, holiday Thanksgivings if you celebrated it. My name is Edith Gnanadass, and I think my last name is the most challenging for people to say, and it's really not that hard. And I am in the Department of Leadership, and I'm a faculty person in the Higher and Adult Education program, and I've been at U of M now. This is starting my 4th year. Very exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we're very honored to have you with us on our panel today. Our next panelist is Dr. Patrick Murphy.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dr. Murphy. I'm in the CEPR department, specifically in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling program. This is going on year 3 in the department at the college. And a lot of my work is around multicultural counseling, diversity, and counseling relationships. So.
Wonderful, and thank you for joining us on today as well. One of our newest faculty members who joined us this semester, but certainly has some rich ideas to share on our panel today is Dr. Mia Obiwo.
I am so excited to be here and share with you all today. Yes, my name is Dr. Mia Obiwo. I am an assistant professor of early childhood education with emphasis in urban education. So yes, I look forward to sharing.
Wonderful, and thank you. And then we're also joined today by another colleague in ICL, Dr. Wesam Salem.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy grading to those who have not finished yet. I am in ICL, as Dr. Hall mentioned. I've been with the University of Memphis in different capacities, 2 years as a graduate student and 1 year as an adjunct. And this year I'm joining as a clinical instructor. I'm in the elementary education department, and my specialty is mathematics and science education.
Wonderful, and welcome. And our final panelist for today, also from our department and ICL and our IDT program, is Dr. Andrew Tawfik.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you. My name is Andrew Tafik. I'm an instructional design and technology, and I've been with the program for about 3 years, in the middle of my 4th year. So happy to be here with you all. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And so without further ado, I'd like to pose our first question to our panelists. And that is, what has inspired your teaching during this semester? What has inspired your teaching during this semester? And we'll begin with maybe Dr. Salem.
As all of you, I think our love for teaching and our passion for the profession has always inspired us and continue to inspire us. However, within this climate of uncertainty and this widespread of injustices, I'm particularly inspired by my fellow educators who engage in discussions and intentional teaching practices surrounding equity and social justice. So I had a lot of circles that I am part of where we bounce off ideas each other. We talk about how we could incorporate equity and social justice oriented education in our classes, and how we can rethink of our teaching practices and refining instruction to encompass more of the equity-oriented approach. And while this pandemic really shattered our lives, I think it pushed us to interrogate the taken for granted practices and to rethink of our courses and the structure that we have really got accustomed to. So I found this a challenge, but I guess another opportunity as well to revisit my courses and refine instruction and find different ways to engage with my students.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Murphy, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Kind of along the same lines, a big piece of inspiration for me this semester has frankly been the students themselves and really empathy, and trying to take into account not just the position that they find themselves in with inside the classroom, but outside the classroom, especially with the unique situations, to use a word we seem to be using a lot this semester, throughout their lives, whether that be both the things that are happening personally for them at home, as well as the things that all of us have been watching nationally on the news, whether it be, politics or the various pandemics that we're dealing with currently. But trying to take those into account and adjust what's happening inside the classroom, both to reflect what's happening outside the classroom for them, to be flexible in meeting them where they're at this semester in particular, while also still holding them accountable to the rigors and requirements that we have in the field. And for me in particular, also using this as an opportunity to ask the students to do a lot more reflecting around the identity that they're cultivating, not just as a student, but as future counselors in our field, and what that's going to mean on being kind to each other and me sometimes too, when things are going on.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Obiwo, as a first year faculty member here in Memphis, that I imagine it's been quite a few transitions for you. What has driven your inspiration as you approached your teaching this semester?
Yes, well, for me, I almost feel like I really had the spotlight on me to really showcase what it means to be resilient, and also what it means to be responsive in the classroom with my students. I mean, for those of us who study culturally responsive pedagogies, asset-based pedagogies, like, we are now more than ever supposed to practice what we preach. And so I've just really enjoyed having the opportunity to really take a look at my own adaptability and my own creativity to make sure that I am meeting the needs of my students. I'm very hands-on. I like anchor charts and markers and moving around the classroom and groups. And so for me, I've really had to take a step back and evaluate, so what am I good at? What do I need to work on? And what do I need to do to make sure that my students are successful? So modeling that for them, and also really putting the language to it for them. So explaining to them what that process is for me so that they can understand what that process would be for them as teachers.
Wonderful. Dr. Tawfik, as a faculty member in a program that is 100% online, there may not have been as many adjustments as one may assume for you and your colleagues in the IDD program, and maybe as some of the others. But even in the face of that, what has been your inspiration as you've been meeting the needs of your students this semester?
Yeah, and I just like that. It's kind of similar to, I think, what Patrick was talking about, just drawing inspiration from the students. Like you mentioned, that we have a number of students that are online, and we have a lot of adult educators, especially in the corporate sector, FedEx, but also throughout Tennessee and the region. And one of the things that's been really encouraging to me is they would say, here's how I was doing training or some kind of educational activity, and this is what it looked like in a face-to-face setting. But my experience has changed. And so some of the theories that we've been reading, some of the things that have been assigned to us are similar but different. And so that they've been taking some of the text that we've been talking about and teasing that out further, or even challenging them to say, you know, where does my line between theory and practitioner diverge? How is it similar? And just having the students be a source of inspiration, and then bringing that into the classroom and being able to kind of share their collective experience about how education is different in an online space, and how they all have adapted and using each other's experience to make their own workplace better. And that's been really encouraging as that community has developed.
Wonderful. And Dr. Gnanadass, in your work with in the program in leadership and adult and higher education program, what about your inspiration meeting the needs of your students this semester?
I actually resonate with many of the things that my colleagues have said. For me, I think it has been both my educators, but as well as the students. But it's the courage and the resiliency of my students that has really inspired me and pushed me to do the hard work that we have to do in these times. And what I have found is, and I think this is the experience of many of you, is our students are not just dealing with the pandemic. They're already dealing with life. And, you know, the pandemic has added another layer. And so for our students to really engage in coursework, even though there are so many other things that are going on, and then willingly and honestly engage in conversations about racism, structural racism, Black Lives Movement, and for Black students, you know, their strength times, and their will to share their lived experiences, and for the white students who have the courage to say, hey, I don't need somebody else to educate me. I am going to do the hard work that is necessary to do. So that is what has pushed me. And, you know, for me, I think what has been really good is that my students have challenged me to face my own implicit biases, right? Because we are learning together. And so once again, this semester was a challenging and brave space for me as well, because I learned with them.
Well, thank you all for sharing and responding to that prompt. I think, you know, several things that emerged from each of your responses included, you know, a perspective of starting with a perspective of empathy that without us having to ask, I think almost every faculty member in this college was aware and had an appreciation for the challenges that our students were facing this semester. And so we approached this semester from a standpoint of empathy. But then from Dr. Salem's comments to so many of the others, we brought a different lens from equity because of so many other national movements that have taken place across the country, the issues that we've been faced with dealing of racial biases and our own unconscious biases, that we're having a greater moment of awareness, sort of a moment of awakening for all of us as well. And I think, you know, the perspectives of, I heard several times the notion of resiliency, the need to be responsive, and to meet the needs, and then the modeling for us, especially as we're preparing educators, especially in this time of uncertainty, our ability to remain resilient, to remain positive, to remain upbeat for our students is also part of the expectations that they should have for their students in the pre-K through 12 space, and even in the adult and higher education spectrum in which they're preparing. So again, thank you so much for that. For our second prompt, it is having us to think about our instructional strategy. So as we prepared this perspective of inspiration, right? What we're bringing, the intangibles that we're bringing into each of our coursework. Now, how do we recreate that? I think Dr. Gnanadass was talking about engaging conversations. Well, what have been some of the most effective instructional strategies that you've implemented to engage your students? Whether it's around the content, whether it's around some of the conversations around, you know, current events, things that have been happening in our community and our society as a whole. What have you found, and especially in the context of remote learning, what have you found to be effective instructional strategies for engaging your students? And I'd like to ask Dr. Murphy to start the conversation with that prompt.
Sure, be happy to. I think as most of us have probably figured out this semester, anything that we can do that isn't us just on a Zoom call talking at our students has been the most effective. So I'm kind of doubling down on as many kind of experiential activities and active learning engagements that I can do. I think specifically the ones that stood out the most to me as I was kind of reflecting on the prompt that you all provided us was really kind of twofold. One for my students was trying to do a lot of real world application through that being role plays and case studies, especially around cross-cultural counseling relationships. So asking them to engage with those that are different from themselves along multitude of identities, including reaching out. I have interview assignments where they talk to others, ask them important questions about the field, those that are willing to engage with them. And also paying attention to the voices beyond my own in the classroom. Quite frankly, I kind of do my opening spiel for all my classes anytime I teach multicultural, and I point out the obvious to them that I have many identities of privilege. You know, I'm white, cisgender, you know, male. And so I kind of get that elephant out of the room and then start engaging with them around the identities that they hold. And I use a lot of voices outside of the classroom. So we'll call it in normal classroom spaces. I would usually have at least some number of speakers come in from many of the identities that we're talking about in the classroom. But because that's a little bit harder in the current situation, I've used a lot of videos, recordings, a lot of articles written from Indigenous people's perspectives, various people of color perspectives, LGBTQ community to engage, so that they're not just hearing a singular voice around a topic. So that's probably been my most engaging pieces that then come back to questions in the classrooms.
Oh, that's great. If I may ask again, Dr. Murphy, what do you attribute to creating that type of atmosphere where you can have that type of conversation in the classroom with your students? You know, not only for you, and you mentioned sometimes you got the ball rolling by identifying your own identity and sort of having, but can you speak a bit more in terms of how you felt that create an atmosphere where your students from many diverse backgrounds could sort of be comfortable to engage in that type of conversation?
I tend to use myself as an example a lot, especially this semester, around essentially modeling, right? I ask all of my students that are all training to be future counselors that a big part of our profession is being genuine and being authentic. And if I'm not willing to do that and demonstrate that to my students, then I'm not really setting a model or giving them a demonstration of what that actually looks like, right? About how are you upfront about what you're engaging in and what you're doing. And so I think for a lot of my students, I do a lot of work on the front end, building safety into the classroom. And a lot of that safety comes through my own discussion and disclosure and honesty that then sets up that these are okay things to talk about, right? That while these may not be the most comfortable conversations, that discomfort will actually create more growth for them. And then I show that throughout the semester. So that means I have to walk what I talk. So in the discussion boards that I have going on, if somebody is kind of, we'll say, getting out of line a little bit, maybe talking in some disrespectful ways, that's not something that I can wait 3 days to address, right? I have to make sure I'm paying attention to that, or I've trained my GAs accordingly to make sure that they're engaging with those, and teach people how to have healthy confrontation, right? That it's not a bad thing to have that discomfort. And for a lot of my students that maybe haven't had those exposures, to coax, I guess, those questions out of them. And that means inviting people to the table in a real way that says, okay, these are our ground rules. So if you look at my syllabuses, if you look at my instructions, even in my modules inside of eCourseware, I do a lot of front end, like saying, these are the expectations I have. This is how we're going to engage in material. And then I try to engage along those lines myself. So.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Dr. Gnanadass, how do you prescribe or attribute effective instructional strategies to engage your students?
This has been something that I've been really thinking about and struggling with. And so, and to build on what, Dr. Murphy said, for me, this semester, I have really reframed the classroom as a brave space instead of a safe space. And this is a notion that I really, really struggled with. But this semester, I fully committed to it. And I really draw on Arau and Clemens, Boostrom, Bell Hooks, and Merriweather when I think about the brave space, because the assumption when we talk about a safe space is really that it's going to be comfortable. And I think that as an anti-racist educator, I have to disrupt that. And so, and the questions are safe for whom and safe from what? And I think this is a question as educators we've asked ourselves. And so for me, I really struggled and was challenged by the notion of creating the class as a brave space. And when I talk about the brave space, I'm talking about spaces that demand vulnerability, risk, and courage. It's a space where our positionality, privilege, and truth claims can be challenged in a space where there is respect. And this is also, a brave space is also one in which it doesn't promote intellectual safety, but really for us, and this is a space that we co-create with our learners, instructors, and learners, where our intellectual safety, positionality, truth claims are also challenged, and we are accountable for it. So that's really what I was working on. And as you know, everybody taught online, but in the higher and adult education program, our classes are online as well. So this is what I was working on. And so I really borrowed from Arau and Clemens and Merriweather. And so some of the guidelines that I followed and I included in the syllabus are it's okay to disagree. Don't make the conversation about you. Decenter yourself and be willing to own yourself. Challenge by choice, meaning encourage participation, but have learners determine their extent and nature of the engagement in the class. Be respectful and explicit, and how respect can be demonstrated, and do not attack a person's character. But I just want to say this is work in progress, and there's a lot more work that I need to do, and I'm already thinking about how to work on this.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you're as you're describing that, it's work that we all still have left to do and complete. So thank you. Dr. Obiwo, and then to Dr. Salem, our colleagues in ICL, As you think about instructional strategies from a pedagogical perspective, what have you found to be effective from your standpoint of providing instruction for your students this semester?
Okay, yes. So I do want to say that I have done some of that same work of humanizing myself first. You know, at the beginning of the semester, making sure that my students see me as more than an instructor. I was once a teacher candidate. I was once a first-year teacher. I am still a professional in the field of early childhood. So to let them know that I am in this learning process with them, that is very important. As it relates to a pedagogical strategy for me, I'll say this. So even though we're in this this very uncertain time, there's still one thing that is so for sure with all of my students. Either they really want to be teachers or they are really seeking to better their craft as teachers. And that has not changed throughout this entire pandemic. So with that being said, it's been really important for me to provide them with tangible and practical strategies for their classroom and for their teacher toolkit. To provide them with some optimism and something to look forward to as we think long-term and on the other side of this pandemic. I'm helping them to develop their craft and to feel great about the things that they do. So I would spend the beginning of each class introducing a new strategy, a new check-in strategy that relates to the content of the course that could also be implemented with young children. I would break them out into their collaborative groups where they had the opportunity to actually utilize the strategy. That would give me the opportunity to bounce into each of these groups to get to know my students better, to get an understanding of their beliefs and their thinking and their attitude. While at the same time, because this happened at the beginning of class, I was able to take attendance while I popped into each of those groups and see who was there and who I needed to check on. And then also it allowed me to come back together as a group, highlight some of the key conversations that I noticed when I popped in each of the groups. And then we were able to have this holistic discussion about how the strategy would be good for young children. So pedagogically, that was a wonderful thing, providing them with practical strategies to use in their classrooms.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And even coming up with your own assessment of how that has worked for you this semester and plans for building. Do you have any plans of adjusting your strategies as you think about what next semester may bring?
Oh, definitely. I mean, as I'm still thinking about whether or not we are going to be in person or whether we are going to continue in the virtual format, I had all of these strategies in my teacher toolkit that were good for in-person learning. And so this semester and next semester, I know that I'm going to have to continue revamping what I know, continuing to research more strategies that'll work for young children, especially when I'm thinking about the really young children, kindergartners and first graders in this space. So, I mean, I'm going to continue to do the work to make sure I am adapting to the needs of the young children and also my students.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much. Dr. Salem, what strategies have you found to be effective for engaging your students?
It's interesting how we're all thinking of equity and responsiveness and empathy in our discipline, but they are somehow crystallized differently. I'm resonating. A lot of my colleagues' comments resonated with me. Dr. Obiwo, and how the responsiveness and keeping the idea of your students' needs in mind. On the more on the practical end, I have explored a lot of e-courseware tools that help engaging my teacher candidates with content and pedagogy at the same time. And the idea of the brave space actually translates in mathematics as draft thinking. So I use this model to kind of create that brave space that we talked about earlier, where we are sharing ideas in draft. So this is our first draft of thinking of the concept, thinking of the pedagogy, and that enticed a lot of students to participate. I was looking for tools to also help those students who are shy, do not turn on their cameras, or they mute themselves throughout, to also participate. And I came across some of the tools that really I found helpful. I put them for you all in a document, a quick document with some links. The most important tools that I felt was in staying with the theme of being responsive to my students' needs, where the video assignments and the checklist. The checklist kind of like a blueprint for the students to when can you do this, when do you read. Even though all my assignments were due at a specific day of the week, I have paced these assignments throughout the week so the students have the option of completing the assignments according to the base that I have established. The checklist, the students in many occasions were raving about it and saying how they help, the checklist helped them. I also had the exit ticket at the end of each class, and that exit ticket was really what triggered my thinking of my practice. I would gauge their academic growth, their understanding of the concept, how the Zoom interaction actually was helpful or not, how the asynchronous week was also contributing to their growth professionally. And based on that, I would just modify instruction afterwards. So I have a ton of record or ton of data in terms of how the students really progressed in my class. And with time, with this brave space and the draft thinking and mathematics, students started opening up, and I could see more students turning on their cameras and participating in discussions. The most beneficial tools were like the interactive slides and the Jamboards. So students will put their sticky notes and share their ideas without having to speak out in the class. So I gauged their understanding and their a grasp of the concepts and their contribution to the discussion without them having to speak in the class. So those were some of the helpful tools. And of course, shout out to the Summer Institute. They provided us with a lot of really practical tools that we could use in the class.
And do you plan to make any major adjustments to your instructional strategies as you plan for next semester?
Absolutely. When I first started with all these tools, I was a little bit overwhelmed and wanted to do all of them at once, and that did not fall through. So I took some of the tools that were really compatible with teaching mathematics online, and I honed the skills of working on these tools. So I'm now looking into other tools that probably will make the course more inviting and more fun to interact with. Hopefully I'll do a better job in incorporating more of these tools. But definitely this constant reflection has been paramount in this space.
Wonderful, wonderful, and thank you. Colleagues, I think we're all hearing in terms of such rich reflections from each of our panelists as they have approached this semester and even beginning to think about their plans for adjustments for next semester. But I want to also allow Dr. Tawfik an opportunity to discuss effective instructional strategies that he has found that worked for him this semester.
Sure. Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things. I think having taught online a couple of times, one of the things I want to make clear to the student is making sure that online doesn't mean isolated. So trying to be just really intentional about how to connect, but knowing that they're in a situation where if you aren't intentional about connecting, it oftentimes doesn't happen. So I try and approach, instruction in that way in a couple of respects. First thing I try and do is I will try and set the stage for self-directed learning and asking specific questions that would allow them to engage and ask meaningful questions in the discussion board. And so kind of what I'll do is that video that's there, I create, for instance, like a 3-minute video, and I think through where we've been in the class, where we are, and where we're going, and then some other questions that the field is still wrestling with. And in the discussion boards, I try and further that. And one of the things I found myself doing recently, and especially the more I do online, is asking students to reflect on meaningful learning problems. Not just say, you got to learn this theory for this week, or you have to turn in this paper or whatever, but trying to encourage them to say, you're in the driver's seat of solving meaningful learning problems in whatever context you might find yourself, either as a librarian, as an instructional designer, corporate setting, or a media specialist in school, whatever it might be. And so when it comes to discussion boards, I find myself, I encourage them to say, what failure experiences have you encountered? And now let's think through that failure experience and let's apply the theory. Would that theory help you, solve that problem in a more meaningful way? Or are we still wrestling with that? And what do you say now that we've been able to kind of collectively reflect on that? Do you have better ideas for the theory, and let's lean into that a little bit? Or do we have a better clarity as to what the theory said we should and shouldn't do? And I find that talking about those failure experiences have been really rich, especially in an asynchronous format, and that's been really helpful for me. And I think the last thing that we do, and there's a shout out to Dr. Craig Shepard, but he helped me think a lot last year about sustaining conversation. And so one of the things that what he suggests is, you'll post on initial day and then respond, let's say Sunday. And sometimes what I would see is kind of flurry to post by 11:59. But what he says is suggesting posting on different days. And that allows you to be able to sustain that discussion along the way. And then what I'll try and do as part of that, and how I'm adapting my strategy, is say, okay, if someone wrote something on Thursday and a similar question or maybe an alternative perspective was posted on Friday, then I'll try and respond and make those connections to the students so that they don't feel so isolated. Or post like an announcement to say, hey, here's some questions that are happening. Here's kind of this collective reflection. As you respond to your peers, try and adopt like this particular perspective or this identity. And that tries to help make those connections. So those are some of the things that I think have been really helpful for me, and but a lot of other ideas have been shared that I'm looking forward to implementing in my class.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Again, one of the things that at least I heard emerging from all of your perspectives was an intentionality around your approaches. There was a reason why you're doing what you're doing, grounded in theoretical practice, your own personal perspectives, and even there sort of this metacognitive thoughts around pedagogical practice in terms of why are we doing what we're doing. And so that part is really coming and resonating with me around the intentionality of your approach. We have two final questions that we do want to pose for. I'm watching the time, but what we would like to pose to our panelists. And the first question is asking you to take a bit more of a personal perspective. Many of you have shared your own approaches to your coursework this semester. But the question is, what do you believe has been your greatest strength or asset in regarding your teaching this semester? What do you believe to have been your greatest strength or asset as you approached your teaching this semester? And I'd like to begin with Dr. Obiwo.
Yes, so this goes back to some of the conversation that we've had with the previous question. And I think for me, I've been able to foster a sense of community in the courses that I've taught because I have been very open, again, with who I am and where I come from and my beliefs and my attitudes and my values as an educator. And I modeled that, during our first course and then subsequently every week after that. And I've just been very, very, very frank about what my beliefs are, what my experiences have been, what my strengths have been as an educator, and things that I am still working through and learning, things that still challenge me within the field of early childhood. And with that, I feel that my students have been able to do some of the same thinking. I've been able to pose questions to them where I see their thinking has shifted over the course of the semester. They're feeling open, with sharing when they feel confident about the knowledge, when they feel like they need more instruction, or when they're feeling like they need a little bit more support with things. I have also, as a part of this, I think it's because I've made myself available to them. I hold my office hours before my class, and so I'm available 45 minutes before class begins. And at the beginning of the semester, they didn't take advantage of it so much, but towards the end, I had many of them coming in before class asking questions. And I do the same thing after class as well. I end with this slide, things to remember. This semester, all of their classes were online. And so it could be difficult to keep up with everything that you have to do. So for my course, I would provide them with the slide, things to remember, to let them know what we be discussing the next week, also with what assignments are coming due. And once the class was over, I would take that same slide and post it on eCourseWare under the updates. And so I let them know it's okay. You have a lot going on this semester. We're all learning. Please continue to ask questions. I want to build your inquiry. I want you to feel comfortable with what's happening this semester. And so, yes, I would say just helping them to feel comfortable with sharing and modeling what it's like to have these discussions in the classroom.
Thank you. Dr. Tawfik, what have you found to be your greatest strength or asset regarding your instruction this semester?
Sure. One of the things I think that's been really helpful is in our field, in instructional design technology, we kind of joke that no one goes into instructional design technology on purpose. They accidentally find themselves into it. They maybe started out as a librarian and then they got into more training, or in my case, I was an IT analyst and then I got into corporate training. And so we kind of joke about this idea of imposter syndrome, like I'm not a K through 12 teacher, so therefore I shouldn't be in education. But what I've tried to do is try to say, try to encourage students to use that as an opportunity to develop their own voice. So if we have a K through 12 educator, what does a K through 12 educator struggle with that a corporate trainer could help with? Or what are the beliefs that are driving training in industry that could be blinders, and how a K through 12 educator could help show some of those things, some of those assumptions that are driving that. And so whereas imposter syndrome might be something I think to hide from, but encouraging them to lean into those practices to say, you probably have a different perspective that maybe others don't have. Don't shy away from that because you don't have the perfect experience, but actually lean into that because it's an opportunity for you to for your own learning, but it could be an opportunity for others that are in different settings to maybe think about their own learning. And so that's been really helpful, I think, in our classes. And I've learned some things. I think the students have learned some things. And I think like what we were hearing earlier about developing that sense of community that we're all learning. No one owns this, but I need to be humble and mindful enough to listen to what others could, shed a light on to what I might be missing. And I think that's been really helpful for us.
So thank you for that. And colleagues, I'm getting sort of like on those who may watch Wheel of Fortune, at some point in the episode, there becomes a bell that sort of rings and says, so we have the time to transition now to the remaining part of the segment. And so what I would like to do with some of our remaining time is to first to open up to other colleagues who are here with us. Many of you may be familiar with your hand raising feature on Zoom, that I would like to ask if you have a thought or comment around what you have found to be maybe your greatest strength or asset that has attributed to your teaching this semester. Would you like to share briefly for the group as a whole? And then we're going to reserve a few moments for some additional questions that may have come in on our chat as well. But would anyone care to share at this point around something that you have found or your own belief to be one of your greatest strengths or assets or most effective strategy that has worked for you this semester?
Hi, it's Widlin, and one of the things that, and I'm in ICL literacy program, I think what's been really helpful is at the beginning acknowledging that things are hard for students and having a conversation about how things are hard. I remember 5 weeks in, I had to remind myself and students during our discussion that we're still in the middle of a global crisis, that even though we're doing the exercise of schooling, things are still very, very difficult. And so I think one of my strengths has been carving out time for students to reflect about what's working, what's not working, what are they proud of, what are they willing to let go. We've had that, we cycled through those questions throughout the semester. And one student said, like, had it not been for that time, they wouldn't have taken the moment, they'd have been go, go, go. And so I think for me, it's been being really upfront with hardship, but then giving space to reflect about how that hardship is impacting them and the things that they're actually accomplishing.
Wonderful, and thank you. Other colleagues would love to share, what have you found to be maybe your most effective strategy that has worked for you this semester?
Hi, this is Tammy, ICL department. One of the strategies that I used specifically this semester that a lot of my students responded very well to. Since I'm teaching students how to be teachers of elementary students, we took several days to model different social emotional learning activities. And so one of them was mindfulness and doing the whole meditation around just taking the first 2 minutes of the period, if you will, or the first 2 minutes of the class period to just relax, meditate, and just bring your thoughts in and to, think about your breathing and things. And many of my students reflected in the chat about how they haven't stopped to think, haven't stopped thinking this whole time, and they really appreciated me taking that time as a part of class. Not only was I modeling it so that they could do it for their future classrooms, but they were appreciative of just having that moment to just stop and just have a mindful minute about, getting rid of all of the having time to kind of focus on that. And so modeling those social emotional learning strategies have been very impactful. We did some activities around the loss of Chadwick Boseman and how students of color would respond to the loss of, the Black Panther. And so we did a whole exercise around that. And so again, being responsive to our students, but also using those as teaching opportunities to model how they can use different strategies with their own students in the future.
Wonderful. So much of what has been shared today has been dealing with the issue of relevancy and sort of connecting our students to current events and things that resonates with different communities and students with different experiences. And the more we can be mindful of that and then to be intentional with our practice, we can help make those connections for our students. I would like to, one of the things as we transition into the very final aspect of our time today was around what more can we do? What else do we wish to learn from others? And so I'd like to ask Dr. Salem and then Dr. Murphy, if they would just add briefly, what more do you hope or wish to learn from your other colleagues relating to your teaching practice?
I think my biggest challenge was wrestling with the moderation of empathy and rigor at the same time, which taking on this model of being empathetic educator and attending to the students' needs. I always questions like, am I really helping, harming the students? How is this intertwines with the delivery of instruction, the quality of instruction? And usually because we all develop our course where we build on on the idea of progression in concepts. So you develop this concept with your teachers, and then you build on the second concept and so on and so forth. So I always, I'm wrestling with how can I be using the model of empathy in my instruction while at the same time maintaining that rigor in the course and that progression that we all are aiming at. So I would love to hear some ideas or maybe recommendations in terms of how we can marry empathy and accountability in a successful manner.
That is a great point. Dr. Combs has posted in the chat, I think, grace versus accountability. And so something that we're working to be mindful of. And these may become topics that may inform our future conversations in this institute. But Dr. Murphy, quickly, what additional things do you hope and wish that you might be able to learn from other colleagues?
Well, first off, I'd just say I'd like to highlight and double underline and co-sign off with that 100%. I think the biggest thing for me this semester in particular is just having those colleagues and both inside the university and outside the university that I can kind of consult with and kind of check where I am with things to make sure that I'm not maybe falling too much into the overgrace kind of side of it and losing accountability or vice versa. And just asking for that feedback. And that includes from my own graduate assistants that are in the classrooms with me, from my students themselves, as many people mentioned assessment. But I think the biggest thing for me is just constantly trying to ask and find anything I can, especially in our current time and setting on engagement, getting those students to turn their cameras on, to keep them on, getting them to talk during the class period and not just in the discussion boards where maybe it feels a little bit safer. So anything that further increases that kind of sense of community that many of the other panelists already brought up. So.
Wonderful, and thank you. And then Dr. Gnanadass, final comment on this question, and then we'll open up to others, other colleagues who are viewing the conversation today. What more do you wish to learn from other colleagues or instructors?
I would really like to know about how you are all engaging in self-care. Hooks talks about how, as to be effective instructors and to engage pedagogy, we have to be whole and actualized as educators. So, and Audre Lorde also talks about self-care as political warfare. And so really to think about how are we engaging in self-care and how are our students engaging in self-care?
That is wonderful and so critically important as well. And this is all very helpful information that I know will sort of fuel the plans and preparations for other topics for this institute as we go throughout the remainder of this academic year. But I'd like to open also to other colleagues who are here. What more do you wish to learn that may help inform our planning and preparation for future conversations like this? Suggestions for topics, recommendations for conversations such as this that you would love to share?
I'm Angie Powell, math ed, and I struggled with transforming my class to online and because the manipulatives are like, they're not what we do, they're who we are. So for me to be in a group with other people with this very same challenge of how do you move this to effectively but it's very, very, for me, I felt it was very discipline specific. Does that make any sense?
It does. I know from my very own science method.
Yeah.
I was teaching this semester. I found myself apologizing every week in terms of, I'm sorry that we can't do this in person. I'm sorry. And I had to work myself out of that in terms of also trying to transition in terms of that. Normally we would do this, but we're going to do that. And you're beginning with a letdown. And so, but having to work through that and trying to work to keep them engaged. Didn't have answers, but we didn't stop working. And so we just try to provide a lens for our students to develop to kind of help an understanding of what it would entail, but definitely informative and helpful.
And with that, the pacing of when you're in class struggling with the manipulative versus when, even if I have an online manipulative and you're struggling with it, that time thing is very different electronically. Does that, I feel like I was just so new at teaching this semester that I was like starting from day one, but that was just,
yes.
Me, that was,
that was a completely different lens and a major shift for all of us.
Yeah.
What more do you hope to wish and learn from each other that can enrich this conversation and inform our practice moving forward?
Hey, it's Woodland again. I'm interested in learning more how folks are supporting students who are in the red zone. What are some of your techniques for reaching out or connecting to do your best to assure that student makes it successfully? And I think that falls in that grace and accountability framework that we're talking about earlier, but there are a few students where I was concerned and I was unsure about some of the best ways to support them.
Always it's the personal touch. When I had people falling behind, I would email if I could notice that they were falling behind because I had so much to do. I would personally say, could you get this in and this in and this in and I'll grade it. I mean, I sent out an email today regarding that, that get it in, please. These are extraordinary times and I'm doing extraordinary things because these are extraordinary times. I'm doing stuff I would never do. And I always said, now, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't be extending these deadlines like this, but that's what I had to do for me ethically, I'd be grading up until 9:55, I'm sure, whenever they're due.
Any other points, colleagues, points of note, any other questions that we can ask? We're going to reserve the final few minutes for Dean Hill Clark to provide closing remarks and comments as we wrap up this conversation. Again, this is our first time doing this, and we're thankful for a wonderful group who came together to help plan, to organize, to help us brainstorm the questions. So thanks to all of you who are part of that development work, and thanks to our panelists who work to prepare themselves and inform their comments and remarks. But lastly, maybe we could take one more. Any question or reflection for future practice or ideas that you may wish to learn from other colleagues that can best inform our practice?
I had a question, sorry, in the chat at the very beginning. So I wanted to make sure we got to this real quick, and then
please,
Dr. Tillis. Dr. Serafin, and I think this will go towards grace versus accountability, as we were talking about. I had a practical question about what has been the panel's approach to attendance for students who log in while at work or who sporadically attend synchronous meetings.
So I think these are great questions for us to address. And I think these are also some questions that Dr. Hall can pull together for us. And maybe we can actually, Dr. Hall, if you're willing and interested in doing this and working with the planning committee to pull together some recommendations or ideas that we get from all of our colleagues. Some additional ones can go into the chat box. I know our panelists would be willing to provide some recommendations related to that question, because that's a really, really good one, in addition to all the other great ones that have been asked on today. And any other thoughts or comments, maybe we could capture those right now in the chat box so that we can be respectful of everyone's time. But let's not lose that question. And I think it was Dr. Tillis who had one final comment, and then I have about 3 minutes to kind of close us out and to wrap us up. Dr. Tillis?
Thank you, Dean. I just had a quick, I guess, question or things that I'm thinking through on a consistent basis is how we continue to develop a sense of community in our online classes, what kind of activities we can engage in, and things that will help us create a space where our students feel more comfortable sharing with each other.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Tillis. That was also a question that just came in from our colleague, Dr. Eli Jones in the Department of CEPR, that question around how do we establish and create the sense of community, the grace and versus accountability, or the grace and accountability model. That question keeps coming up as related to the one that Lauren just presented that came up earlier in our chat box. I'm going to kind of connect the dots and then close out. I'm really excited about this opportunity that you've allowed us to have. I want to thank Dr. Hall for moderating such an outstanding and engaging panel as our Assistant Dean of Student Success. I would also like to thank our distinguished group of panelists for sharing ideas and for being vulnerable in this moment to say, you know, I didn't know it all. But I was reaching out, I was listening, I was learning, I was reading, and I was trying out to make sure that I was doing the very best I could do, considering the very unprecedented times we are currently in. And I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude again to Dr. Hall, but Dr. Beverly Cross and Dr. Steve Zanskas, who served on our planning committee. As Dr. Hall shared at the very beginning, this was born out of what you told me. As all of you all know, I conduct listening tours with all of our first, second year faculty as they join us in the College of Education. That time is so critically important for me to hear directly from our new faculty around what's working really well and where do we have opportunities to grow. And out of those conversations this fall, this particular panel was developed, created, and now implemented. So I would like to thank all of our first and second year faculty for planting that seed. As a result of that, in our planning committee, because we've been talking a lot, and you've heard this today around equity, we decided as a group and as a leadership group that we would move forward with the inaugural. So this is a first. So I heard you, Dr. Shiro Geist, This is the first, so that means there's more to come in the spring and in next year, inaugural institute on equity-driven education and instruction. And I think that's really important, and I'm looking forward to this work. So just want you to know that as Dean of the college, I listen and I take your ideas and recommendations back to our leadership team. And I'm hoping that this is just one more example of how we are being responsive. Closing out, I heard 6 R's. Dr. Perkins, Dr. McGilvery, and Dr. Seraphin will appreciate this. You know, I'm paying attention to my reading here, my literacy skills colleagues. I've heard 6 R's, 3 E's, plus M&A, and 2 S's. Reflection, I heard that from each of our panelists, and even for those of you who chimed in, that self-reflection and reflection is critically important. Respect for ourselves and others and what we model in our classrooms. Responsiveness, I heard that word over and over again, and you all know that's like my favorite R word. How are we being responsive to one another, to our community partners, to our students, etc. Heard rethinking. I'm rethinking some things because this is an ongoing process. I also heard reimagining. I'm kind of reimagining. I heard you, Edith, talking about that in your class and all of the learning that you are doing and holding yourself accountable in that space. And then I also heard reaching out, that I don't know all of this. Yes, I may be a professor, an instructor, a clinical assistant, but I don't know it all. So I've got to reach out to my peers and to my colleagues, to the research to learn more. I heard that. The 3 E's I heard as we're closing out, empathy, practicing empathy in our classrooms and with our students. Engagement, thinking of different ways. I think Tammy Combs shared some ideas around engagement. Wesam said, oh my goodness, that summer institute, if you didn't get a chance to go and they offer it again, you may want to check it out because there's some great ways to engage our students. And then I heard this word from every single panelist, equity. How are we promoting and engaging in equity-driven instruction and teaching in our classrooms? And what does that feel, look, and sound like, whether we're working remote, in an asynchronous environment, etc. Then I heard plus M&A, modeling and accountability. How am I modeling myself as an instructor and teacher? How am I holding myself accountable while also holding my students accountable in an empathetic way? Because we are definitely in extraordinary times. But how will I continue to do that, even as we move forward, right? In the next semester, in the next 3 semesters, the next 5 semesters. And then finally, the 2 S's I heard, support and self-care. How am I supporting my peers and colleagues as well as my students? But then also self-care. How am I taking care of myself? Because if I have nothing to give, then we're not going to be in a good place. So how am I modeling what I'm asking my students to do? And I think we heard a comment around that, I think it was Tammy Combs again, who said, you know, we had 2 minutes of just quiet time at the beginning to think and to reflect and to slow down and to take a breath. So again, I would like to thank our panelists from across our departments. Wesam, thank you. Sarah, Mia, thank you. Edith, thank you. Also, Patrick and Andrew for offering up your time, for sharing your ideas, and for being vulnerable in this moment. I walk away as dean of this college excited and inspired for what's to come. And I would like to say to each of you, thank you. Thank you so very much for everything you have done for our students and that you will continue to do for our students. You continue to challenge us to be responsive to your needs and ways that we can be of better support to you. We wish you a wonderful, safe, enjoyable, relaxing winter break. We know many of you are in the midst of grading and wrapping things up this semester, and please know that we miss you. So these moments right here give us an opportunity to see you and to engage with you. So on behalf of the planning committee, on behalf of the Dean's leadership team, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for everything you do. And this is just the beginning. And we will continue this work moving forward as we've done with our research speaker series and now having our inaugural equity-driven teaching series. So again, thank you panelists, thank you colleagues, thank you leadership team. Take care, be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.